Members, ladies and gentlemen, and the participants on the Zoom online. This is the first live book event post-pandemic and our launch of the hybrid initiative with today's conversation between Dr. Julie and Dr. Chaudhuri. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce two luminaries in the field of literature, art, and culture, who will be in conversation a little while from now. It is also a matter of great pride for all of us that both of them are members of our Bengal Club. First, I will introduce Dr. Amit Chaudhuri, the author, followed by Dr. Julie Banerjee Mehta. Whatever you speak of Dr. Chaudhuri, much remains untold. Dr. Amit Chaudhuri, the author, is a remarkable intellectual with a great record of literary writing, showing a level of sensibility as well as kind of quiet humanity, which is quite rare. It really is quite extraordinary that someone who could have that kind of range has in its terms of his work, and it could be so consistently of the highest quality. His novels are the most internal, psychological, delicately written, introspective of all the contemporary Indian novelists. He is a great prose stylist. He writes the novels that Virginia Woolf would have written had she been in India. Dr. Amit Chaudhuri was born in Calcutta in 1962, grew up in Mumbai. He was a student at the Cathedral and John Connon School, Bombay, took his first degree in English from University College, London, and wrote his doctoral dissertation on D.H. Lawrence's poetry at Balliol College, Oxford. His father, Nagesh Chandra Chaudhuri, was the first Indian CEO of Britannia Industries, and his mother, Bijaya Chaudhuri, was one of the greatest exponents of Tagore songs of her generation. Amit Chaudhuri is a classical singer in the Hindustani tradition. He is the author of 7 novels, the latest of which is Friend of My Youth. Dr. Amit Chaudhuri stands out as a master craftsman who, with exquisite wit and grace, can depict a rapidly changing India in a single life, an entire life in a single detail. He has won innumerable prizes across the world. He also received the Indian government's Sahitya Akademi Award. In 2012, he was awarded the West Bengal government's Rabindra Puraskar for his book on Tagore. In 2012, he was also awarded the inaugural Infosys Prize in Humanities for outstanding contribution to literary studies. He has been the professor of contemporary literature at the University of East Anglia from 2014 and is now the professor of creative writing at Ashoka University. He has 3 books of poetry also, St. Cyril Road and Sweet Shop and Rama Nujan. Saying a few words about Dr. Julie Banerjee Mehta. She was born in Calcutta and educated at Loreto House and Loreto College, and then on to Jadavpur University for her first master's in English. She went on to earn her second master's and doctoral degrees in English literature and South Asian studies at the University of Toronto. A specialist in post-colonial and world literature and diasporic histories, She taught the Chancellor's Endowed Program in the Canadian Study Centre and Department of English at the University of Toronto. She is the recipient of the prestigious Mary H. Beatty and David Chew Fellowships at the University of Toronto, and a translation of Tagore's play, Daghor, the Post Office, was performed to celebrate Tagore's 150th birth anniversary in Toronto. The translation earned her the title of one of 16 most influential South Asians in Canada. Widely published in peer-reviewed anthologies, she is the author of Dance of Life, The Mythology, History, and Politics of Cambodian Culture, about the resurrection of Cambodian dance by 7 women survivors of the Khmer Rouge genocidal regime, and co-author of Strongman, the best-selling biography of Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen with her historian husband, Dr. Harish Mehta. Her current research and prolific publications include diasporic identity, trauma, memory, language, and foodways. She currently resides in Calcutta, Kolkata, teaching postgraduate English at her alma mater, Loreto College. Julie conceptualized and has been curating and anchoring the Bengal Book Club for last 26 months. The Library Committee, chaired by Dr. Sandeep Chatterjee, co-chaired by Mr. Parthuranjan Das, has members who are outstanding scholars, members in the Library Committee who are outstanding scholars and are specialized in their individual field. Therefore, events of the Library Committee are rich in content and its presentation. The book club, which is a part of the Library Committee, has reached a different level, curated and anchored by Dr. Julie Banerjee Mehta. Julie, I now hand over the proceedings to you. Everybody have a wonderful evening. One request to you all, please keep your cell phones in switch off or silent mode. Thank you.
President Kunal. President Kunal, that was an amazingly overwhelming, kind, and very generous introduction. I don't want to speak for Amit, but for myself, much more than really. So with that, I want to open the floor to say how enormously pleased and honored we are to have all of you here to welcome a prodigious writer who is a formidable talent in world literature today. My encounter with Amit Chaudhuri goes back a long time. I was a rookie reporter, just about had moved from Australia to Singapore for the Singapore Straits Times. And one of my first assignments on the literary reviewer stage was to review in 1993 his book, A Strange and Sublime Address. And yes, and after you. Thank you, Harish. So with that, I dove right in to Amit Chaudhuri's oeuvre, and I must say it was compelling and addictive. And since then, I've kept track through my years as a doctoral student, where I finally not only covered him in my 150 tomes that I had to in my vivas for the PhD, but also where his Freedom Song was one of seminal texts. So, Amit, let's dive right in. Today, since the time that you were writing Strange and Sublime Dress and Afternoon Crack, which was, I believe, while you were a doctoral student at Oxford, you've come a long way. And I was just listening to your address to Duke University some years ago. And one of the things that was said about you by the very astute person who introduced you was, we could invite Amit to speak about pretty much anything. He's such a wonderful raconteur, and I'm really chiming with that.
Not sport.
Not sport, okay. All right, that's honest enough. So, how do you locate yourself today in world literature? Because you don't write as a diasporic writer, you don't write as a vernacular writer, you are, as Sham Salvador, I would say, just a bloody damn good writer. So, how would you place yourself?
Thank you, speaking for myself, for a wonderful introduction. Thank you, Julie, for your enthusiasm and for inviting me to do this. I'm so glad to be here among you all. Most of us know each other, so I think it's a great deal of you are known to me. What kind of, yeah, so this is a good question, actually. Where do I place myself as a writer? I'm not a diasporic writer, according to, that is certain kind of definitions that have come up. The diaspora is one of them. I'm not a writer who writes in Bengali, of course, so I'm not one of the so-called vernacular or bhasha writers. I think of myself as a vernacular writer, but in English, but although without sort of having recourse to a kind of invented English. Of all languages, and especially literary languages, are invented, but I never set out on a conscious project to Indianize my English, my language. So in that sense, I'm not one of the kind of globalized sort of proponents of an Indian vernacular. What else am I not? So I'm not a lot of things, and this of course is less comfortable than I would want, because being something that's definable always makes life easier, right?
I think that's a brilliant that's a brilliant entry into. You've given me a segue to ask you the next couple of questions, actually. We have been exploring Sojan with the book club here. Many members are here. And a very good evening to all our virtual attendees. Lovely to see you all. Professor Abhishek Parui, Professor Ripandi Lepcha, and all the other people, Urmi Sinha, one of our own, Gautam Sengupta, and Rohit Manchanda, Anushka Hasra, all of you, Shurana Roy. The two issues that came up again and again by all explorers here was the issue of your exposition on space, all of your novels, I think all, and I speak about the first lines of A Strange and Sublime Address, which is by far my most favorite novel of all of the 7 that you've written.
8.
Touché. He saw the lane, small houses, unlovely, unremarkable, stood face to face with each other. And then there's a whole segment on what this space does. What have a bearing on your musical acumen as well, because we know the architecture of music often speaks to the architecture of literature. Um, that would be my first, and then I'll carry on with.
Sure. Yeah. It's possible. I mean, the question about music has been asked to me right from the outset of my life as a published writer, which began, as you pointed out, when I was still a graduate student. That's when my first novel came out, and my first two novels came out then. Um, but um, but I was always flummoxed by this question, because I even now I can say that I have no consciousness of being a musician when I write, and I have no consciousness of being a writer when I sing. So when I'm singing, I don't remember I'm a writer. Yeah, uh, and the other way around. And at night, I don't remember I'm either. You know, when I watch TV or when I'm having dessert, I'm focused on those activities. So, but I've thought about it. I mean, in the sense that it's kind of come back to me this question in various ways, and you bring it up in the context of space, which is a nice way of bringing it up. I would say that space is something that has always attracted me. The spatial. This is because I have a short attention span, and I'm bored by the linear. So the unfolding of time, which I sort of maybe identify with the classroom or having to finish something, is something I want to uh, get out of, escape. You escape by looking out. You look out at spaces, and some of the spaces you cannot see, and those spaces you imagine. You can only hear what's happening there. In that sense, sound is of importance to me, because sound carries with it a kind of the the presence of other spaces which aren't visible to you. So space, which is visible and invisible, those have always been for me a kind of im, im, something that rescues me from time. I mean, the space has, of course, temporal qualities, but not in the way that a piece of work that needs to be finished does. Um, so and the kind of music I'm drawn to also, I may have got at some point drawn to Hindustani classical music because its temporality has the khayal especially tries to approximate the expansiveness of space radiating in various directions. So, I mean, obviously space, unless it's in a Renaissance painting where there's a vanishing point and there's perspective. But otherwise, if you take out perspective and the vanishing point, space is radiating in every direction. And that is what I'm not in terms of space. I'm not interested in photographic or Renaissance type realistic depictions of space where there is a vanishing point. I like space to radiate in different directions without there being any weight on any particular direction.
I think what you're saying would appeal to a lot of us here who've been looking at Sojan and talking about the spaces which you talk about there. Fascinating. And what the person that comes to mind, whom you might have interrogated in your studies, would be a man by the name of Gaston Bachelard, who talks about espace being exactly what you're saying, that it's not a limited space within a framed photograph or a framed painting, but it is a space which is inhabited or could be inhabited by different people, such as an airport, such as a hotel room, such as this room. You know, none of us have a claim. There is no focal point of power, but it is a shared space. And I think what was very appealing to us in your recent book, Sojan, anybody who's read it will remember that little understated, very kind of Amit Chaudhuri humor where he speaks about the toilet, where he meditates on Kenzabaroi using the same toilet. So I think that's an absolutely brilliant way in which he brings about the juxtaposition of thought and space. And even when he goes shopping, and he walks on the footpath in Berlin, when he speaks about the smoke and mirrors in that city, he's talking about a space that was past during the Holocaust as well as the present. So I think you make very good use of space.
Thank you. I've described toilets in each one of because it's kind of an enclosed sort of semi-secret space.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yesterday I was looking at Dominique Lapierre's book City of Joy, and I was doing a little piece for Telegraph, and it occurred to me in my interview notes I had from the past with him. He thought it didn't matter that slums were the way they were, because it needed a great deal of courage to act, which is very private in public. So anyway, that's another.
That's another one. That's yeah. But I mean, speaking about toilets, I mean, at that time when I was kind of writing about, I mean, there was no project to write about toilets. They just came up.
Right.
The bathroom toilet, Strange and Sublime Address, then Afternoon Drag as well.
Yes.
And at that time, I didn't know that the another great Japanese writer, one I greatly admire, Tanizaki, has a work called In Praise of Shadows about Japanese architecture, and he spends some time speaking about the meditative qualities of toilets. Anyway, yeah, I thought I'd bring that in.
Yeah, interesting. Yes. Also interesting is the way you bring in fluidity. And I think many of us who've read your recent Sojan would agree that the idea of water, the idea of rain in your earlier books, the rain pelting down
in Afternoon Rag.
Right. Is akin to your stylistic and a formalistic approach to writing, because you are one writer, I think, who sort of delves in and out almost seamlessly, and has that quality of being ice, glass dimmer, as well as water vapor, as well as water. So you're uncontainable, you're indomitable, and you're fluid. So even the way you use bhasha, the use of isho, bosho in Sojan incorporates the Bengali language. We were talking about languages. I think that kind of fluidity is also very much a part of your persona. So would you like to comment on that?
Sure. Let me try and respond to that. But you remember there is a scene in Afternoon Rag where it rains, and it rains like the Afternoon Rag is set mostly in Oxford. So I think the narrator points out that it's raining the way it rains in India, but it's a very brief spell of rain in which the people kind of are both excited and overjoyed and panicking, and water is kind of temporarily kind of flowing through the streets, and then they take shelter in a shoe shop, and then it disappears, and he misses an appointment with a woman student he wanted to see that day. Yeah. But you remember that, do you?
I also remember, Amit, another scenario, and I can't really fix it exactly where, but there is this beautiful rendition of rain which cleanses everything, water, which is it during a rag that is being sung?
Oh,
Do you remember?
this is the poem which I use as a prologue for Afternoon Rag about the death of the music teacher, and over there too it is raining. Yeah. Um, no, I asked you, did you remember that?
Yes.
There is a reason for me asking you that
The
question.
bridge between India and Oxford, the bridge between monsoon.
No,
and...
I asked you this because I was reminded as I noted the fact that you're bringing up this scene in which is not significant in any way. Either in terms of plot or in terms of
character
or character or theme. It's not significant in a way that can be where the significance can be gauged in any clear way. And it brought back to me something that the poet Arvind Krishna Mehrotra was saying last week, I think. So on Buddhadev Bose's birthday, the Center for Studies in Social Sciences had organized annual Buddhadev Bose lecture. Buddhadev Bose, for those who don't know, is very, very distinguished, a great Bengali poet, critic, and novelist. And so he was talking about, Arvind Krishna Mehrotra was talking about some poems maybe he translated from Prakrit. He was saying one thing that has struck me now over all these years is that what survives, what literature is meant to preserve and what survives through literature are the things which are not momentous, but which are forgotten, generally speaking. So he says, whatever floods and other things are happening at that time when the person writing in Prakrit is writing 4 lines about a thunderstorm, about a brief spell of rain, we no longer remember any of those important episodes in history through literature. Literature allows that brief spell of rain to survive. And how does that happen? It's because our minds some of our minds have that retaining quality that retains for some reason that brief spell of rain, whether it's in our lives or in a piece of writing. But the literary record, which is giving you nothing more than that brief spell of rain, of course, is also having to face a constant milieu, an environment which is saying this is not enough. So you're always you're always at once opening yourself up to the world, but you're also taking a position against it. In as much as you're taking a position against a world which may be a literary world which expects more from you, but you're at the same time opening yourself up to the world, to the spell of rain, and making that space within language to record and preserve and give continuance and life
to that moment,
to that non-momentous moment, which may have which is happening now, and happened also 2000 years ago, or whenever it was.
What comes to mind as you were speaking to me was Bhartrahari, the great Sanskrit scholar and writer, also has a beautiful, I think he has a kind of a sonnet to rain. Somerset Maugham has a short story called Rain, which some of you might remember. And it is this same, nothing spectacular happening, but just in that moment of non-momentous happening, to capture that. And then, of course, the question comes to mind, which I hope, Abhishek, I hope you're listening, because Dr. Paroi is very interested in how memory works in literature. So he has set up the Memory Studies Institute at IIT. So we can expect, hopefully a nice exchange between Amit and Abhishek. Moving on a little bit, to another question which comes up, I think, in the North American classroom, and I'm sure it would come up here as well. I haven't had the privilege to have Calcutta University put your books on the syllabus, but I'm just remembering 3 or 4 lines, and let's see what you have to say about this from Freedom Song. Horidashi, probably less than 13 years old. Small Horidashi, barely 4 feet 6 inches tall, had cleared the dining table, first cupping her endlessly compliant palm, pushing bits of moist rice and salt that had littered the table into its dark cave, to rest there between her heart line and her lifeline, collecting bits of fish bone as well as to deposit them there, and then curling her fingers as if she were holding a secret, throwing the debris into the kitchen basin, though she had been told not to. You're a master of minutiae. You know, you really are. And this is
Thank
only
you.
one example. Felicitous descriptions of the bridegroom, which again makes an appearance and reappearance in so many of your books. Whether you're describing the call of the koel, again in a garden space, or the pigeons pooing and piling up their poop in a monument. How do you think it's very difficult, usually, for anyone who writes, but how do you work on this microcosmic brilliance to bring out the macrocosm?
Well, that's very kind of you, Julie. I mean, as a response. So, maybe I should have been a poet or an artist. I mean, yeah. Yeah. Maybe I am a poet if the word could open up to accommodate, or whatever this. I mean, Virginia Woolf. I'm not comparing myself to her, but writing in a letter. I'm writing a new book, and the new book was To the Lighthouse, and she's saying I have to find another word for it. It's not a novel. I have to find another word to describe it. So what I'm saying is that, but then all writers, all artists are those who make of what they do, whether they are a particular kind of poet or musician or artist, what they must do within that historical period of time. In my time, it happened to be the novel. However, my proclivities were non-narrative, and I wouldn't even say contemplative, because I found in those moments a lot going on, but not a lot going on in the sense of story or narrative. The challenge was how to create a novel out of these, what you call moments of description. Usually, description is what in a realist novel stands behind a character. We are learning about the story of the main character and people who surround the main character's life. The main character is of primary interest. What the main character and who the main character interacts with is of secondary interest, and where they live and what they look at and what's around them is of tertiary interest, and whatever sort of is described, to use your word, as part of the main character's milieu is done so to illustrate the life of the main character. So the description is seen as a secondary thing, as a secondary facet of a mainly a narrative-driven genre. Description also risks holding up the story. However, many gifted writers working within that particular genre have smuggled in some of their most brilliant moments within those descriptive moments where they're not telling the story. um, in my case, I didn't even make a pretense that I'm preoccupied with the main character's story. What I wanted to do was bring together an assemblage of moments, and yes, give to the reader an illusion that there was a story being told about a main character, and that there was a sequence at work. But it was an illusion, and this I learned that it is possible to create that illusion early on. I think from the process of revision and editing, which I knew then in my case was similar to the way cinema editors used to edit cinema. So what you see as a sequence, and I'm not talking about very static, dull Hollywood films nowadays, but I'm talking about the great works of cinema, the most imaginative works, it's an illusion. The sequence is an illusion. And also the sequence is the most persuasive bits according to the director and the editor. They have taken a lot of footage. They've kept what you see. Then they've put it together for you to believe that this happened after that and this happened after that. Actually, that is not the case. So my challenge was to create as a narrative artist an illusion of narrative without actually doing so, being interested in something else. And I think the other form, besides novels like Wolf's, which gave me a way to think about this in that way, that it was possible to do so, was cinema.
And I can't, I'm not being facetious here, but I can't tell you how on point you are here, and no kidding, because Sojan, you become the master artist of space. You don't tell us the story because there is no real plot. As Foster would say, the king died, and so the queen died of grief. There is no such, you know, yes, there's no such explanation of, well, this is going to happen, or there is no premonition. You don't have a named narrator. You do not give us any idea of any love interest that really can become something. Birgit is kind of a secondary, tertiary. And I think in Sojan, all of us found that we had more questions than we had answers, right? So, do you think that when you look back on your stylistic or formalistic uh, evolution, if I might use that word, as a novelist, as a writer, it's very different from the Obhi and the, the Shondha and the Piyus from your earlier works, Amit, and yet you hold the reader in thrall. This is huge. I mean, uh, I think it's a sizable leap from what you did to what you're doing now, and yet you are managing to keep the interest of the reader.
I'm glad to hear that. Um,
I think all of us who've read Sojan would agree with that. Okay, so what would you say?
in terms of how,
How
it's changed,
yeah,
or
how it's changed? Yeah.
I have no idea. I mean, as far as grabbing the sort of, keeping the reader sort of absorbed. The reader is also myself, so I have to check whether I'm absorbed or not. So I'm sort of quite strict with myself, because I don't subscribe to any extraneous reasons for being absorbed. I mean, there are no extraneous. I don't subscribe to any extraneous reasons for reading, other than absorption. So, but of course, it means a lot of hard work. It means jettisoning a lot, and this started with the first book, and it continues into the eighth book, and it has led to the various challenges I face as a writer, in terms of, you take out so much. What is it that remains? And and it also leads to kind of short novels. So except the Immortals, which is of kind of acceptable length in terms of uh, publishers' expectations. Um, all my other novels are very short, and this one you'll be shocked if you knew the word count. You know, so
It's under 150 pages. I mean, that's
pages. They could have made it into 1,000 pages. They can do that with the typesetting, and but yeah, but it is, and I'm not going to reveal the word count, although I know what it is. But it's a very, it's my shortest book. It's my shortest book. Every time I finish writing a short book, I've had this moment of panic. That firstly because it's supposed to be a novel, and structurally, although it's very different from the conventional realist novel, I'm still thinking I'm using the novel form here. This is a novel, and and then I think, but I've produced something that is this particular length with a strange and sublime address, which was at least twice its length when I began to work on it, and then I began to take out, rewrite, take out, and then it was I was left with about 35,000 words. And this got me into trouble, and I had to wait for 2 years before I found a publisher. After having, an excerpt came out in the London Review of Books, and then I was getting letters from publishers and agents. And then once the agent realized um, that I'd produced this very short work, she liked it, but she knew it would be a challenge selling it. So anyway, I won't go into the story about Strange and Sublime Address and how it finally found a publisher. But there it was. And then with Afternoon Rug, but thankfully that was already under contract. I produced a 29,000 word book. And I thought, oh God, but this is under contract. Anyway, I got away with it. This time I finished Sojourn, and I saw what the word count was. And I thought, why am I? And I'm when I finished it, I thought, I'm almost 60 years old. Why am I going through this even now? Why do I have to go through this panic periodically or so regularly? I should be settled, happy, doing. So I am doing what I want, but this whole business of producing things which one has no control over, in a sense, and also things without a history a genre without a history in the English language, especially not just in America but in England, the short novel. So if I were living in the early 20th century, and writing in Bangla or German or French, I would not be worried. But because I'm writing in English, and also because I'm an Indian writer in English post 80s, where there is Midnight's Children, etc., etc. And as I've said before, India is big, so the Indian novel needs to be big. Given these problems, I found myself in that position after having finished a Strange and Sublime Address and waiting to hear what the publisher and the agent would do. Found myself doing my own kind of research, going to Blackwell's bookstore. I was in Oxford at that time, and searching for short novels. Are there others? So trying to create an anterior sort of a tradition behind me. And I found there's nothing there except a couple of women writers, Jean Rhys and Muriel Spark. They wrote one short novel after another, but the rest, they're all producing voluminous stuff. So
Lawrence has some shorter novels. Yes,
he does, but he compensated by writing lots of long novels. Yeah. So but your question was what has changed? Yeah. What has changed is I'm just willing to I was always willing to take risks, but now I really don't care.
Good.
I have sections in Sojourn where the woman, the cleaning lady, is speaking to the man in German, and the man is having a great conversation with her, though they don't understand each other. Now I have put in the German over there with a saying what they're talking about. So he says, did you have a great weekend? And she says, we are running out of cleaning fluid. And it's the people who put that into Google Translate have told me that, well, what's going on over here. So I don't care if people who are reading it, besides not caring whether they understand, or I don't care whether they are getting the joke or not. But it's not that I'm indifferent to the reader. It's just that I think this ethos of being indifferent to immediate access to meaning, this I like.
Yeah. And I
like this.
And I think there's something to be said about the fact that you're probably doing the right thing. I know Terry Eagleton and Helen Tiffin and probably Bill Ashcroft would laud you, because this need to explain everything so that the English reader might understand, it goes against the grain of post-colonialism anyway. So in that way, I would say that you're doing the right thing.
The other thing I would add, I mean, I know you probably want to open it out to questions. The other thing I'd add about that section where she's speaking in German, and which by the way, I've read out in America in my awful accent of German. I mean, I read out the German, that particular page in a bookstore. I had great fun doing it. But anyway, so the other thing I realized is when I laboriously but lovingly produced those sections with the help of two friends getting the German right, etc. I sort of thought to myself, but who is it then who is writing the speech so perfectly? Because the narrator is a first person narrator, and the narrator is the person who does not understand her, but says, as if to cover his back, but he could hear every word clearly. So then who is the person who's putting down the German? And this, I thought, is a signal to the fable-like quality of the book. That the book has a fairy tale quality, which I don't want to associate with the post-colonial ideas of fairy tale, which always mean it's an Indian fairy tale. Indians are, have an oral culture. They live in a world of fairy tales. That's not what I'm saying, but it has a slightly fairy tale quality. If not fairy tale, the quality of a fable.
And of course, as an author, you have always excelled in this way in which you sort of, you are the praxis of the theory which says, with the death of the author comes the birth of the reader. So with Sojourn, I think in a way you're leaving it open as we, in our exploration of your book, have found. Okay, so I think we've done a lot of talking. I've done a lot of talking. And now it's time for some of your voices to be heard. And then we open it up to our virtual, very, very valued opinions from our virtual crowd. So shall we just quickly have a few hands up? Somebody to start. Yes, please.
Hi, that was a wonderful speech. I just want to link up your first answer to the last one you gave and ask you sort of, who is your reader? Who do you write for?
I'm not particularly thinking of a readership in any other terms than a readership that will, for instance, respond to writing, to particular ways of using genre, so to particular ways of using language. That's all I'm hoping for. I'm not thinking of a kind of generalized readership in terms of the common reader, nor am I thinking of a rarefied sort of readership, the more educated literary reader. I'm only thinking of, but I suppose there must, in order to think about things I'm doing with genre, language, my kind of departure from the particular kinds of realism that my work has entailed, and which I want them to sort of be attuned to. I guess I am presuming somebody who has a sensibility for or a predilection for these things. Um, so I'm, but at the same time, I don't think to myself, the person needs to be a literary scholar. The person needs to be an academic. I do not think, firstly, I don't think of the reader, to tell you the truth, at all. Because because you cannot function in that way. You know, whether you're singing or writing, you cannot think what does the person sitting there, what does their expression mean? Am I singing well or not? You are trying to not only absorb yourself in what you're doing, but as with as with singing Hindustani classical music, as Kishori Amonkar used to say, trying to lose oneself in the rag, which is a very difficult process. So she sometimes used to be cantankerous. I don't know if you've seen her perform, whether you ever saw her perform. Uh, Now and again, she used to be cantankerous. Some of the impediments came from within herself, her throat, which had at one time had given her huge problems and continued to give her some problems. But the other was people getting up and leaving. Um, the other thing that she reacted against was spotlight on her. She said, I can't lose myself in the rag. Now, what she said was that it is difficult to lose oneself, and one knows that. When one is performing on stage, it is very difficult. One is trying and trying and trying to lose oneself in that exposition. There are all kinds of impediments to that within oneself, outside oneself. So I don't really primarily think of the reader. When I go back to my writing and I see the paragraph I wrote the day before, I think this is a terrible paragraph, and I feel a sense of despair. And then I begin to work on it. Then I am a reader and a worker, you know. But otherwise, I'm not second guessing any kind of generalized reader. But I'm hoping that the milieu exists, which I know it doesn't, there are very few in it, and the members of it are very unpredictable. They're certainly not academics, or most of them aren't, uh, who 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 are attuned to these kind of shifts that I'm talking about.
Thank you, Amit. That took us into many other vistas to think about, I think. Okay, so some more questions? Yes, please. If you'll introduce yourself, that would be
I am Manish Thakur and I teach at IIM Calcutta. I wanted to know that do you see any conflict between your creative self and your academic self? Because very often we see that academics are more critique oriented, and as a creative writer, you have to do things in imaginative ways. So if there is any conflict, then how do you negotiate? So can you reflect on
Certainly.
this? Yeah.
I have no academic self. I mean, in the sense that, and I'm not saying this facetiously. I mean, I'm my kind of life has been non-academic. I did write a PhD thesis, a DPhil thesis in Oxford. It was an unusual thesis, I think. Again, I mean, as I said, this pertains to my thesis as well, which wasn't a proper scholarly work. I kind of gave a kind of interpretation of Lawrence's poetry, D.H. Lawrence's poetry. My main source were the poems. So I uncovered no fresh scholarly material in the archive. I went to the Bodleian ones, the library in Oxford, because I was told that you need to go to the library. And I sat there with a copy of the collected poems, which I already taken it with me, and I just sat there and I marveled at the people next to me who were doing proper kind of scholarship. And then I thought, I'm not going back to the Bodleian. It's not serving any purpose. I never went back to the Bodleian, and I wrote the book. I wrote the thesis out of the collected poems. It got published later on. 10 years later, it was well received by you. She mentioned Terry Eagleton, by people like Terry Eagleton, but it wasn't scholarly work. I had a nightmare before my viva. Um, Don Mackenzie, who was a pioneering scholar and teacher of book history, who had, in my first year at Oxford, taught the bibliography bibliography class. I had a very, very nice man. I had a dream that I was walking down Hollywood Street. This was in the weeks leading up to the Viva. And Don McKenzie was in front of me, and he turned back and he said, "Culpable." And I thought, yeah, this is because you have not produced a proper thesis. Anyway, so what I'm saying is, I have not. I, I, but I do critical work. I think all. I don't know footnoted work. I don't abide by the 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 kind of requirements, academic requirements of, what should an academic be writing about today? What should it be producing today? I don't do any of that. I stopped writing scholarly peer-reviewed work mostly, and began to write critical essays. I think all work, all creative work is critical too, because as I said, one is taking up a position, even if one decides that I will write nothing about, I will write about nothing but that that thunder shower. In doing so, one is also throwing out a challenge, because if I were a different kind of writer, I would have written about something else that people are telling me to write about. You must not only write about the thunder shower, you must write about this, that, and the other. So no, I'm going to write about the thunder shower. My article taking up a critical position. In many ways, we take up critical positions as writers. But yeah, I think it's important, far more. I don't think, to stay with your question for a little longer. I don't think thinking about what you do in any way impedes creativity. All writers, especially those who've been at the cusp of certain periods, not just writers, even composers, musicians, have thought deeply about what they're doing and why they're doing it. There's somebody like Schoenberg, the Western composer, um, they are thinkers, you know, and one can talk about any number of writers, whether it's Lawrence or Eliot or others, who are thinking deeply about why they're doing what they're doing.
Question? Yes. Okay, you go ahead, and then the gentleman, and then we. Go ahead.
Okay.
Keep it short. Answer and question. You have a long way to
Some
go.
years ago, if I'm not mistaken, probably in the 1980s, in India, there was a big brouhaha about the great Indian novel. You recall the parameters of those discussions was coming, and roughly that the idea was that it hadn't come, and that it was expected, like Kalki or some great figure to be riding in on a horse. Not sure, like probably on Duchess, Billy the Kid, all guns blazing. But this great Indian novel, is it coming or has it already come?
Um, Great Indian novel. Um, uh, you know, firstly, I don't have much use for the term Indian. Um, I mean, especially when it's sort of it's a marketing term. So let's put it that way. And with one cannot think of this with a genre like a poem, the great Indian poem. You know, one would realize the foolishness of coming up with a term like that. With a novel, you expect it somehow to sort of carry national history or the nation. I think any sort of stick is constraining, or all it can help is a marketing strategy.
Not a scholastic question, but it's a very simple question that came to my mind is that how do you start writing? Do you have the concrete plot in your and things come flowing in you and you don't know how you're going to end? So,
question. I mean, I don't have a plot. It's not the plot which impels me or an idea of a plot. With A Strange Sublime Address, I had this idea that I'm taking a holiday in Calcutta, and that's all I had really. The holiday seemed to carry able to write about and describe things which otherwise might seem familiar as being strange. You know, so each one of the books comes from some moment of excitement brought about. There are other such moments of excitement. With Sajjan, for instance, I thought a man is arriving in Berlin in, let's say, 2005 or whatever. The memory of the wall coming down, and therefore the memory of East Germany, the Eastern Bloc, or the Soviet bloc, the east of Berlin has not faded. It's still alive. Anyway, he arrives into that Berlin, and he's a man from India, but that is not important. And what happens is he finds a deep sense of familiarity in the city. And so it begins I mean, unlike, I have a vague idea where my novels are going to end. Not all of them sort of turn out the way that I think they will. Um, but in this case, it did. I did think that I was going to end there, and I'll tell you why. Um, I thought this man is becoming part of Berlin and its history. Berlin means a complex of things that have to do with his history, not just Berlin's history. Berlin is at the confluence of this world, where the world which was formed by the Soviet Union and America, the West, on the one hand, on the other hand, socialism, on the other hand, the free market, and the other things that came in between, the world that formed Berlin, formed him, formed you, formed me. We never realized it was a contingent world, that it would end. I mean, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, or whatever, 40 years ago, you did not know that we would be living in a world where there is no socialism, so to speak. We could not conceive it. As I say in the novel, as the narrator says, even when the Berlin Wall came down, one of the characters says in passing, nobody knew that it in Berlin. Those who were in Berlin didn't know that the Berlin Wall was going to come down even a day prior to what actually began to happen. So, what was the question? I've lost it.
The ending.
The ending. So because see, I'm sharing some of the narrator's qualities. I'm losing myself and losing them.
The author in the text, right?
Yeah. So he is formed by what Berlin has been formed by. He feels a deep resonance and familiarity with it. He is reunited with it, though he may not have really seen it very much before. He is drawn into it. He's absorbed by it and into it. By the end, he wakes up. By the time he wakes up, he is in the house in the former East Berlin, beyond Kreuzberg, of the cleaning lady with whom he used to have these conversations. That was in my head. That this woman, in whose balcony he finds himself, waking up to the sunlight, and he speaks to her, and she replies in German, is that woman who seems unsurprised, as she always did, by him. And then why unsurprised? Because I don't know, but because he has integrated himself into the rhythms of that life and that history and that memory, so that waking up, he feels he is in East Berlin. His choices are constrained. He is in that world, the divided world. But I cannot say that. The moment I say that, he woke up, he thought he was back in the old East Berlin. He had become an old East Berliner. Something is lost. That's why it ends where it does.
Thank you so much. The questions were wonderful. I'm sorry, I have to cut it and give our virtual members a chance here. If we have time, we'll come back to you.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Avishek, you go first. Dr. Avishek Parui set up the Center for Memory Studies at IIT. And then I think we'll have Professor Ripandi lecture. Okay, let's do this first. Go ahead.
Right. Well,
Abhishek.
thank you very much. Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Little louder, please, dear.
Hi, can you hear me now? Am I audible?
Better, yeah.
Okay, excellent. So thank you very much. That was an outstanding and very absorbing session, as always. And I've been a big fan of Dr. Chaudhuri's work. And I somehow believe, maybe it's a bit precautious of me, but I somehow believe his musical self and writing self are actually quite organically connected in interesting ways. And one of the things which I find recursive in his writing is the idea of rhythm. It's so rhythmic. And you're talking about worlds, the modernist and cinema, the sense of space. But I think as someone who now researches on memory, we end up spending more time looking at forgetting rather than remembering, because I think forgetting is perhaps more important than remembering in terms of why certain things get forgotten and how certain things get forgotten, etc. And we also know through scientific research today that forgetting is not the opposite of remembering, but it's actually a component of remembering. In other words, you have to forget if you are to remember. The brain is hardwired to forget information all the time, right? So I think what really strikes me, if I were to pick one feature in Dr. Chaudhuri's writing, which is, I speak as a fanboy, is I think this marvelous and impeccable control of rhythm, right? I think that rhythm, that interface between memory and forgetting, that interface between space and no space. And Dr. Julie was speaking about the idea of space and the hotel, the elevator, the non-spaces, the liminal spaces, which connect you to the more defined spaces. But I think what Dr. Chaudhuri's writing reveals to us is that sometimes these non-spaces are actually perhaps more important experientially, existentially, than the classified spaces. And I think, I haven't read the novel Sojourn, but I think the title is quite reflective of that. It's a temporary stay, sojourn, right? It's just somewhere you stay for a time being, right? And it'll come to an end. There's an open-endedness about it. At the same time, there is a finitude about it, right? You know it's going to come to an end, but at the same time, it's open-ended, right? So I was wondering if I could just tease the author here to comment on the title a little bit, if that's possible. But thank you very much for this wonderful session. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
No, I think he's come back. We couldn't hear you for a little while. Now we can.
Okay, am I audible?
Okay, so we'll have to sort of cut to the chase, and maybe you'd like to fire a question at Amit after that wonderful exposition you gave us. Thanks.
I was wondering what his thoughts were on his choice of the title Sojourn, because I think the word sojourn is quite complex over here. It indicates a temporary stay. It has a sense of temporality, an open-endedness, but also a finitude. A sojourn will come to an end. There's also the implication there, right? So I was wondering this interplay between open-endedness and finitude in sense of space and time. So I was wondering if I could tease him about why pick this title and what does it reflect on the novel.
Thank you, Abhishek. On there, please.
I will. All of them?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Sure. Okay. Abhishek, thanks very much. Just be on hold. We are coming back to a general answer. Ripandi, there's a lecture. Yeah, go ahead.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for inviting me here. And it was amazing to listen to Dr. Amit Chaudhuri talking about the novels and everything that was discussed on this particular platform. Though my questions were on spaces, yet my queries were answered along the process. So my little question is like, did the author's sojourn in Germany inspire this particular novel? That is my question, sir.
Right. Okay. So those two questions, and this gentleman,
did you have
who
a
was
question?
kind of patiently sort of.
Oh, thank you so much. Most of our discussion today. My name is Bhaskar Chakraborty, and I, like Manish, am a professor of public policy at IIM Calcutta. Most of our discussion today have been on novels because I think Sojourn is a novel. But you have also written some very fascinating short stories. And as you were initially saying, those short stories are so reflective of Calcutta. I mean, they look like indeed vernacular stories written in English. But we haven't seen you go back to short stories in a long time. So I'm just curious to know, very short question, what are your plans about short stories in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Great
So
one.
those are three good questions.
Shall we take one more?
Okay.
Anyone ready with a question? Anushka,
Yes, ma'am, I had a question.
quick one.
Sir, what do you look forward to the most when you're in the classroom, when you're teaching? That's my question.
Nice. What do you look forward to most? And one more. Urmi Sinha, our book club brain, come on.
Hi, thank you so much for this nice, wonderful review. So I just wanted to know that, since you said I'm part of this book club where I read this book, Sojourn. So I wanted to know that, many people had said that, there's an influence of classical music on this book as you thought. Now, what I'm saying is as a writer, I actually want to know that, I understand that you have knowledge of classical music and I understand that you write, but has actually classical music influenced on this book?
Okay. So,
and in what way?
Okay, so let's try. This will be like ordinate Din Ratri memory game. So we will try to go back to Professor Parui first. So his question was about the idea of the Sajan. He also said something about forgetting, and yes, yeah. No, I'm very interested in forgetting. I have an essay which is available on the Los Angeles. It's called the LARB, the Los Angeles Review of Books, their website. It's called Storytelling and Forgetfulness. Yeah, it's about the fact. Just very quickly to it's about how the best writers forget what the important kind of topics or points are. So I usually give two examples of this. A number of examples might be given or might be available, but in this essay I write about the opening 2 pages of Kafka's Metamorphosis. Kafka's character Gregor Samsa has turned into a giant insect, and then he wakes up, he notes this fact, and then he thinks about the fact that he's got a very bad job, and then he looks at the room, and then he thinks it's raining outside, the weather isn't great, and then how is he going to get to work in time given the fact that he's in the state that he is? And then he begins to think about his manager, who has this unpleasant way of sitting on a desk and looking down on him or on employees as he talks. He says, I've had enough of this job. So basically, for about 1.5 to 2 pages, he forgets the problem that he has turned into a giant insect. And this forgetting is essential to the creativity of that story. I was about to say, not just comedy, but joy. Of that creation, which we don't look upon as a joyful creation. And I always, say to my students. I mean, somebody raised the question of
Anushka, my student.
I say a lesser writer wouldn't have lost sight of the fact that he turned into a giant insect. So there is a forgetting going on over there, which is very productive. As far as Sajan, the temporality, that, as I said, if Professor Pari remembers my comment that I was excited when I began writing A Strange and Sublime Address by the idea of a holiday. That is a brief transposition to another place where one does not necessarily confront monuments, but one is in another home, and in that other home, there is the possibility of confronting or encountering things in another habitat again, but finding them over there slightly changed. So this temporality, this brevity allows us to look at what is familiar to us. All of it is familiar. We are not landing on the moon as if it were, out of the ordinary. So in that sense, all my books, most of them, I think almost all, are about a Sajan. Now, the second question,
Professor Lepcha.
was
to do with, is it inspired by anything that happened to me in or my trip to Germany? Uh, uh, Being in Germany gave me the conceit, that, what if what was happening to me, that is my sense of absorption when I went to Oranienburger Strasse, for instance, or these various places in Berlin, what if it were to lead to a different kind of absorption into the city? And if I were to lose my sense of self, which I already felt was happening, what if I were to take that literally? And that taking of that idea literally led to the conceit. So only in that sense. And now, Anushka, what do I look forward to when I'm in the class? It's a very difficult question. Yeah.
You'll have to give Professor Chaudhuri a minute to think about that.
I'll come back to that. I'll come back to that.
Urmi, your question was about music, right?
Yeah.
What about music?
So no, she's saying that this sajans in some way kind of, does it replicate or is it influenced? I mean, is it impacted upon by Indian classical?
Lal is in my mind,
Yeah, in Indian classical music. As I said, it's not something that's conscious to me. I have written about this in Finding the Rag, that there is a similarity in intention and aesthetic between the Khayal singer's aesthetic and mine, in that Khayal and the exposition of Rag has to do with delaying the delineation of certain phrases. The phrases which make up a rag, by which you recognize a rag, are to be delineated, but they are to be evaded as well. That evasion is called improvisation, elaboration, alankar, and it is what is beautiful in a khayal. To those who don't understand khayal, it is what makes them say, what is he up to? What the repetitive of what's the point of all of this? And then to those who understand a little bit, they will say, but when is he going to reach the pancham? So this is because beauty is deferral, is evasion. That I share that aesthetic. I also face this the khayal singers in audience. Not the khayal singers, but the audience that doesn't empathize with the khayal singer. I face that as, what is this guy up to? When is he going to get to the point? So there is that as well. Now, about the short story. Yes, I did write. I have a book of short stories. Thank you for drawing. I mean, thinking about them and making me think of them again. I do very occasionally write stories, but I'm going at a pace when I don't know when I'll have enough to produce a collection. I do like shorter forms. Yeah. I must get back to that form.
Professor Chakraborty, I think you've lit a spark. Maybe we'll find something in a few months.
No, I'm glad. Yeah.
Okay, so this has been absolutely marvelous.
Thank you.
And I really want to thank all of you. No, I think
I look forward to a new, every time I walk into a classroom, I look forward to the fact that there is the possibility of new ideas, and also the kind of fossilized hegemonies. Sorry, I'm now lapsing into the powers that be. Powers that be. The powers that be that have directed the way we have been thinking about literature and marginalizing it in the literary departments for the last 30 years, that this is about to be over. Then Anushka, the disappointing thing is that then all the students need to get jobs, and then they begin to leave aside the very genuine insights and sense of independence they come up with, or they have as students, and then toe the line. And I hope that a time will come when this doesn't happen.
Anushka, does it answer your question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you have no option, right? You have to say yes. All right. Thank you, everyone. This has been just marvelous. Thank you for being patient, all of you. I hope you got something out of this evening. Thank you, Abhishek and Ripande. Thank you. Thank you, Urmi.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
very
Thank
much.
you, Amit.
It's great.
Thank you.
Enormously, enormously pleasurable. Yes. If Amit could be so kind in a few seconds, yes.
Well, on behalf of the book club or Bengal Club, it is my great pleasure to offer a formal vote of thanks to our author. And this is another, very absorbing evening, a fascinating evening. And right from the beginning today, this musical metaphor has got on to us. So I would like to end on that note once again, that it appeared to me like two virtuosos performing a splendid duet today, and coming back to Sham every time. And so we enjoyed it thoroughly. And thank you, Dr. Chaudhuri, for giving us a pick of your mind and how an author's mind work. And thank you, Julie, for your brilliant questions, and all the audiences for their encouraging questions and conversation. Thank you.
Dr. Amita Chakraborty, Chatterjee, yes. Dean and professor and all kinds of things. Thank you. Anyone have books? You try and get the table ready. Chakraborty, please, our very own librarian. I will just empty it out for you guys. Yes, yes, I'll give you mine. But mine is it's a very aggressive pen. Amit, please sit down. এখানে বসো. And you have a little table here on your side. I'm not talking.